Hello, good afternoon. Hi. Happy Wednesday afternoon, everyone. I'd like to start very soon here with my session, user testing your Drupal administration process. And just wanted to get started by introducing myself and letting you know a little bit about my background. My name is Vanessa Turk, and I'm a usability professional and information architect. And I started off my Drupal career actually creating content in Drupal 4.6 for a community-type portal for young women who'd had cancer. After some experience doing that, I got a job training people with new Drupal sites, showing them how to use their site. And through that, I started to get to know information architecture and ask some really interesting questions of my developers that I was working with of how I could make things easier for some of my clients that had a pretty steep learning curve when they were starting to learn how to use their Drupal sites. Here's my presentation outline. All 7 sections are not equal. A couple of them go by pretty quick. But I also wanted to get an idea of who you are. How many of you are usability folks and who have done usability studies in the past 6 months or so? Great. That's wonderful. And how many of you are not usability people or wouldn't consider yourself a usability person but would like to get into it or start doing some usability studies pretty soon? Perfect. Okay. Well, I hope you find this helpful. This information is information that I've gathered over the last 6 or 7 years of doing a little bit of this for all of my projects and a larger chunk of these studies recently as I get more into it. There are things that I find work for me, but not everything always works for people. So afterwards, please, by all means, come on up and tell me what's been working for you, because I like to learn at these events, even if I'm speaking just as much as when I'm going to sessions. All right. I'm going to get started then. Starting off with, why study usability? I mean, why do we do this at all? And I think it comes down to the fact that we like to be efficient. We like to make things work better and be optimal with our processes because, frankly, it saves money. If we're struggling with things, if we're wasting time, if we're doing things over again, and if we have to go and ask people for things over and over again, we're wasting money. So a lot of the time, these things happen because we're trying to make things better in order to save ourselves time and money. So when I'm approached to do a usability study, the first thing I want to know is, okay, what are we studying in terms of a website, tool, and application? What does it do? And just really on a high level, is it a brand presence? Is it some sort of task application? Does it have e-commerce? Are there things, if you sent me a URL, are there things behind a login that I don't see, that I'm not really aware of that's there until I get under the hood and have a look around? Then I want to know a little bit about the organizational focus, because when I'm looking at the site, it may be that it's a brand promotion site, but they really want to do e-commerce. Or there's a little tiny piece that's e-commerce and it's not very successful, and I really want to focus on that. So I'd like to know if the organizational's focus is on programs and services, or is it on the community, or is it on some very key high-profile people whose branding, whose voice, whose content production really need a focus. Then I want to find out a little bit about the organization. It might be that I'm talking to the IT department or the marketing department or the communications department, but there may be dozens of other departments involved, some of them in the web administration process or the content creation process that I haven't been talking to yet. So to get an idea of what the company actually, or the organization actually looks like from the top to the bottom. And then I want to know where they're at in terms of their organizational site admin. Is there a single person who's everybody's sending documents to and PDFs and information for them to manage the site, or are there a group of editors? Are there sectional content managers like in a faculty or department? And do they already have any kind of access restrictions and rules that they're trying to follow? I also want to know if their content ever comes from submissions, or if there are members of the site or members of the public who are submitting content in some shape or form that will find its way onto the site. So once I know that, then I want to know, okay, who's all on this site? Who's actually involved in this? Sometimes the policy and decision makers don't even have access to the site, and they're not creating content. They're just having a look at it and having some meetings and giving feedback. Sometimes they're the person who run the show, and they're the ones who actually manage all the content. They're subject matter experts in every single site, and these would be people who are in an educational institution or faculty, and they're creating content to describe events or resources that people have. Content moderators who might have a role to correct voice and tone, grammar, facts, or even just formatting content that people create for the site. And then there might be people who simply report on something. They create a blog or an article, or they collect some information about events, and they don't really have knowledge about the organization as a whole. They're just kind of working as writers. And then there might be some content custodians, and these might be people who are tasked with just freshening up content, looking for spelling errors, removing content that's inappropriate, just something along the sidelines where they don't fit into any of these other numbers here. The content consumers, I've included these because these are people who may be members of the public, but they're contributing in a way because they're actually commenting or flagging or favoriting some content on the site. So really, you could have a lot of people in the organization that you need to talk to. People from marketing and the communications department. It's very helpful if it's some kind of transactional site to talk to people in customer service to see what kind of questions they're getting and what kind of communications they're having with the rest of the team, because often they'll be right in the middle. But I find that when this happens, they're usually at a certain place in the process of improving the site. They're either moving from a system that isn't Drupal, because I specialize in Drupal, into Drupal, or they're moving from something like just a flat HTML site where they're starting to understand what a content management system is, but they're really not fully comprehending it. Or they're already having a Drupal site, they think they're doing okay with things, they're just refreshing, and sometimes when I do a usability audit, we find a lot of inefficiencies that we can actually target next time we do the refresh and redo architecture to be a little bit more efficient for them. And now before I move forward, a note about feedback. I've seen usability surveys where people are asked very subjective questions. How much they enjoy the site, or how much they like the process, or what's their favorite part about the site. And I think that this can be helpful if you're asking a lot of people, but probably not as effective if you're asking administrators of the site. Because right now, if I were to get you to rate your shoes, for example, you're going to need a little bit more information from me. If I was just going to ask you, tell me on a scale of 1 to 5 how much you like your shoes. And that might confuse a few people, because you might want to know, well, I don't know, color or comfort, or what else is there that I'm trying to find out? And this is exactly the point I'm trying to make with this. It's much more effective if we actually go deep into the weeds and identify some of the things that we want to know before we start asking them to comment, especially in that subjective way. So moving on to actually learning how to organize a usability study, we want to find out the purpose of the site, start to segment our audience groups, find out the purpose of the study. Usually they're coming to you with some sort of a question they have, an answer that they need to find, a solution they're looking for. And then the goal of the study might be to find that solution, but to also find some other things on the periphery that people may mention during the study. And then there's usually a list of suspected issues and an initial list of contacts, because you'll always have a few people that you've been told you simply must talk to because they're just a wealth of wisdom about the site. And then starting to understand how different roles may interact with the site, you're going to encounter different sort of people. People that are looking to the site for information, so these might be people on an intranet, people who are using a site to complete some sort of internal task or process, and then people who are creating content. And once you're able to start identifying those different segments and applying the different processes that they are responsible for, you'll start to see things like these are the people that are responsible for product configuration or tool setup, and this person runs the sign up and registration. And some of these people will overlap, and some people will, you may find, are not even in the correct role for what they've been asked to do. You'll want to go a little bit deeper into those tasks and understand what they're actually made up of on a granular level. What are they actually doing when they're creating pieces of content and managing areas of the site? Are they curating things? Are they submitting and archiving? Are they moving information around somehow? So you get a little bit of an idea of what's actually involved. Then you can start to create scenarios. And scenarios are usually made up of the audience member, the segment that you are studying, what they would like to do, and why they're doing it, because there's usually some kind of value involved. And this is an interesting piece of it because sometimes the value is not really very helpful for what they actually want to do. The value may be the cue that gives you a way to find a better way to do something, because they might be wanting to do something in a certain way just because they've always done it that way. And that is the danger from moving from a existing kind of proprietary system into Drupal, where things may work a little bit differently. And so they're asking, I really need to do this particular thing, but the reason that they're asking to do that is a value that we can actually accomplish in a completely different way for them. So if you're not familiar with user stories, this is the template, this is the script that you can create that will help you define these stories for the different types of users. So as a store administrator, I want to change prices so that I can create a sale, or something like that. It's very important to understand the publication workflow. And I want to caveat that by saying that the publication workflow in real life may be completely different than the one on the site. And sometimes people try to get a little overkill on the site because they want to lock down their publication workflow, and they end up making things a little bit more complicated than they need to be. A really good way to uncover the content management needs is to use the 7 C's, which are inception. Where does content come from? Does the marketing manager decide that something needs to be written? A press release, a graphical element? Who decides that new content is needed? And are there segments to that? Are different decision makers responsible for different types of content? Then who writes the content? Who sources images? Who creates the media for it? And how do these pieces all come together? How is it organized? If I'm creating a particular kind of content and it's got many different facets attached to it, who decides which tags go with which content? Then how is it confirmed? The publishing workflow, does it need a process where I'm sending it to an editor, I'm sending it back to a subject matter expert who needs to confirm that it's actually correct? And then if things change, how are the changes tracked? Is there a revisioning system, and how does it work? And if we don't need a revisioning system and things need to be archived, where do things go? Do they stay on the site, or is there a place where they stay? And then sort of any kind of community involvement. Is there social sharing? Is there commenting? Are there feeds where the site goes into different areas? And anything special about the consumption? Are there access control rules? Are there certain fields that aren't able to be accessed by certain people? Are there inside notes for administrators? Any special analytics or tracking that happens as people move through the site and consume the content? So as you go through this, you'll start to pull out little notes for yourself, things that you'll need to check when you create a script for some of these testers to go through. You'll want to see if they are adding a huge amount of content. Are they able to batch? Are people checking each other's work? Do they need to check each other's work and they're not at the moment? And are there different ways of categorizing the content so that some of it is internal and some of it is external? Or does it need to move from being internal to external? And one of my personal favorites, naming conventions, because sometimes it's not a technological issue. So this is an example of a testing plan that I had for a client where this is a grower and distributor of fruit and vegetables. And they had internal people that they wanted to have tested, their staff. They had wholesaler, food service people, and the community that were members of their site. And so they gave me lists of people, their time zones, and we created some questions and an interview date. And then we put together a list of questions that were, to me, they're not written in stone. They're just a way of prompting me to ask certain questions in a certain way and be able to move back and forth between questions to see if I can engage them in conversation. There are certain tasks that I would ask them to do, but other things that are just sort of conversational that I want to know how they feel about. So usability testing can be done remote or it can be done in person. I've done all kinds of screen captures of people who are further away using every tool imaginable. I think it's just really important to have backup because sometimes tools don't work. I've phoned Chile and Venezuela for different kinds of interviews that I've done, and I've also just gone to local cafes to meet people and sit down with my computer and use something like Silverback where I'm able to talk with them and have them go through the scenarios that I've set up for them. You'll want to explain a little bit about yourself and your role because sometimes people are just sent a very brief email that they're improving the site and somebody wants to talk to them and they're not even sure who you are and what you do. And sometimes they're not really familiar with usability and they have to be told that they're not being tested. It's the content, the site, the workflow that's being tested. Sometimes the information that you've been given about them is not fully accurate. You might need to ask them to explain what they do in their own words, because that might give you a chance to identify some of the other things that might be responsible for, or it might not fully make sense what they've been asked to do with their role. And then you'll go ahead and ask them to walk through their typical use of the site, complete several tasks, and then also there might be things that come up, and they usually want to be able to give you some additional information of how they feel about the site. So I usually allow 25 to 45 minutes. Some people talk longer, talk more than other people, and so schedule a test every hour. Things to watch for: clicking between lots of screens, cheat sheets if they're not able to do what they need to do on the site and they're using other sort of supporting documentation and using external tools for things. So an example of this might be there's a bookstore that on their ordering system, their sections of the site were just numbered, and there were people who had to refer to another sheet to see what the numbers symbolized. So when we test, we're actually also reviewing some of their information architecture components because we want to know if the organizational systems, labeling, navigation, and search systems are working for them, if they perhaps need to reorganize their information architecture to be a little bit more effective both for internal and external use. So this is a fun example. If somebody is looking for a particular piece of content or a resource internally, has it been tagged appropriately in the way that it might be searched for by several different people? A more realistic example might be something like this. So this is an HR form. The human resource manager would know exactly what form it was, but somebody else may call it something different: holiday or vacation or application. So those are the sort of things that you may need to ask people to do the same task in different ways, and also ask for feedback on if they ever get help questions. If people can't find certain things, what are the things that they're not finding? Then look at those pieces of content and see if they might need to be labeled in a different way. Another good thing is to look at how files are organized. If people are able to find what they need to find in their own company or organizational file system, because if that's not in order, then it's very difficult for them to find the kind of information that they need or the files and assets that they need to create the content they're looking for. One of my favorite things is a naming convention. Naming conventions can be extremely helpful when trying to find reusable assets, images, and certain kinds of documents, PDFs, forms, things like that. If they're labeled differently and different people are looking for them, it's very difficult to find. So also, that is one of those non-technological solutions in real world. Labels can be created by different people because different people think about words in different ways, and this is just something that's come up in many different situations. For example, I did work with money exchange, currency exchange, where every location was called slightly differently, and it took me a little while to realize that they were all the same. All of these ways of referring to their location wasn't any different. They were all the same kind of store. A really interesting thing to look at is, do they have any default instructions or help text that might be a little bit confusing, because maybe the help text was created by a development team that didn't fully understand their content creation process. Perhaps the site was created by people in a different country or a different language, and maybe the help text doesn't quite make as much sense as you think it should. So it's interesting to see if some people, if new users, if power users, are using the site a little bit differently. When you get to the point where you're documenting and reporting, you're going to want to review your notes and try to find ways of grouping information into categories. And multiple categories are fine, because there's a lot of things that are going to repeat from section to section. So often I'll go through and I'll comb through and I'll try to group things into users, features, tasks, until I come up with a list that has, and it's okay if things are across multiple lists, that has a little bit of order to it, and it's not always the same sort of structure. Then I use a type of heuristic checklist to go through and identify what these kind of issues actually are. And there's lots of different templates online that you can use to identify best practices. And you might use different ones depending on what kind of site it is. So it's so for example, this is one of my favorite ones, Jacob Nielsen's 10. And this is probably a list that you've seen many times, but it kind of, when you think about it, does apply to many different areas of the site. And it's something very, very helpful for if you're taking your report up to a group of stakeholders who may want to have a little bit of supporting documentation around it. So rather than just giving them a list of stuff you have to change, if you're in a situation where they're asking you to support that recommendation with some evidence, this is the kind of evidence from research, well-documented research that has been around for many years. So something like a visibility of system status, this is something that comes up sometimes, and you'll note this will manifest itself if there's been something perhaps custom created, some kind of workflow where an administrator pushes a button and then they're not sure if they've published something, or they're not sure if they've affected something. So then they have to go and check and see if something has been changed. So this is something that you might see if the developer or the person designing the interface didn't create some sort of system status. Matching between the real world and the system. So this is, if I were to refer back to the bookstore, the different sections of the site on the e-commerce site didn't match the different sections of the bookstore. And they had their reasons for that. But it was a solution was to try to put both of those sections together. So if you were a user of the site, you could see both of them beside each other. And so you did have that real-world match if you needed it. And that was very helpful for some of the newer employees to see. For user control and freedom, this is navigation. There will be a lot of situations where there's navigation within the administrative interface that might be created in a default out-of-the-box Drupal way that could be improved upon, because there's people that are doing repetitive tasks in certain areas of the site that may take 2 or 3 or 4 steps to get to that piece of content. And sometimes it's just easiest to make a quick link for them because they're trying to access the content frequently. Again, with the consistency and standards, I think one of the most common ways that this is a problem is when they've created the site in kind of a technical way where the IT department has applied labels from their best understanding of the business, of the organization, but it's not really words that the rest of the organization uses. So the best way to do that is to go through and comb through all the words and labels and see what people are calling things to see if there's any kind of inconsistency there, because that definitely is a place where people get confused, especially when they go in and rename it and then there's two of them. Error prevention is a good one because sometimes people do things and they're not sure what they've done wrong because they're not getting feedback on it. So there are ways of designing certain kind of interfaces to help people not make errors that are really common. So if you see people always, several of the testers making certain kinds of errors, then it might be a good place to target for improvement. With recognition, rather than recall, sometimes there's categories, long lists, 50 plus keywords for a specific kind of resources. And a nice way to help people find those keywords so they don't start creating new keywords because they can't find what they need is to have them start to fill in by themselves, so that autocomplete, so they're able to locate the keyword quickly and easily. That is a kind of accelerator. So there's other accelerators that people could use, something like a quick link to a particular area of the site where they need to edit something. A lot of the time this sort of thing will present itself and you'll go, oh, okay, right, this is one of these issues. And that'll help you start to create a list. Sometimes the administrative interface has some sort of default theme that is a little bit jumbly, and it could be as simple as just switching to a cleaner theme. It could be that they're using an older one, or they just didn't realize that something really nice and clean was available. And if they do switch, it's a little disorienting, but sometimes it's easier to use something that's a little bit cleaner. And then with errors, we all know that sometimes errors are extremely alarming to some administrative users, and the errors aren't really that urgent at all. And then there are others that are quite urgent. So this particular one for me is a bit more of a training issue to help people understand what is actually a problem and what is just kind of an informational message for them. So when it comes to help and documentation, occasionally the issue is that people just haven't been educated and they haven't been trained on the site adequately. They may have been thrown into their role. Maybe people have already been trained on the site. They're coming in late and they didn't realize the benefits of a formal training program, or maybe it was never designed for them. So sometimes the site lacks documentation, it lacks help, and the solution is not even a usability issue. It's actually getting together with the staff and retraining on the site. So there's different ways of categorizing different issues. If you are creating a formal kind of report, you can create something where you're dividing things into feature disclosure, lack of affordance and indication, an obscure mental model, and a blocking mode or state. So a feature disclosure is quite just as simple as that the user can't find what they need to complete a task. It's either hidden or they're not recognizing it, and they're not able to navigate the menus. They're expecting something to be in one place, and it's actually somewhere else. Lack of affordance is that there's a link, but nobody can tell that it's clickable, or can't tell that something's enabled, and they didn't know that a certain element was something that they could use in a particular way. So that's often the most difficult thing to do when you're sitting beside somebody who's struggling with something, and they're looking to you for help, and you're trying to give them just enough of a hint so that you can go on with your test. An obscure mental model is when they just they make incorrect assumptions about how something would work, or it doesn't match how they need to use the site, or the help instructions are misinterpreted completely. Occasionally there's blocking modes where the site is not in a state where people can edit that they need to edit, and they find themselves in a section, an area of the site, or an interface where they think they can complete something and it doesn't happen. And this is often a place where people they send in help tickets. I tried to do this and it didn't work. And sometimes it's very difficult to reproduce because they've placed themselves into a situation somehow where it's a little confusing how they even got there. So this can be one of the most difficult ones to to actually investigate. So you may need to go back and do it a few more times. And in the end, sometimes things are just not reproducible, which is actually a good thing, because then it's probably not going to happen again. Just a note on creating reports. I always create reports with screenshots and annotated, just kind of helpful hints about what I think would be useful. So you can see in this particular picture, it's a store where the order number is alphanumeric and it's not in the order of the numbers. So 6 is all together rather than actually being in the order of the numbers themselves. And there's also certain kinds of pieces of information on the interface that aren't required by the staff. So it's as simple as kind of going in and saying, okay, well, when you look at this page, what kind of information do you need, and what sort of information do you not need? Is there something missing? Where do you need to look to find the information? Once you have a list of all the user stories and the features, and you've tried to explain what the issues are, you've grouped them, and you've tried to give solutions, then it's time to meet with the development team. I like to talk about what happened and what I need rather than how things should be solved, because I feel like there's such a group of talented developers out there who are much more creative than I am in being able to suggest solutions. I just want to be really, really clear on what it is that I'm actually looking for, and I think that's actually a lot more helpful. So when development planning, it's really great to have a big brainstorming session where you're identifying your needs and understanding what those needs are, and then prioritizing by level of effort and business value. And if choosing solutions is an issue, there's definitely a lot of different ways that you can go about refining and sorting through to see if it's a budget issue or if it's a capacity issue, what sort of what would be the best way to actually decide on what kind of changes to make. So now we're at a place where I've created a few checklists that you can use, and I'm just going to go through them with you here, and then we'll have a short period of time for questions. So once again, planning for the study. The purpose of the site is clear. You've done your user segmentation. The goal of the study has been documented, and you have any kind of suspected issues that people have brought forward, and a preliminary contact list. So this might look like this example here, that there is a content source for educators. They're interested in resources for teaching. Here are the list of users that they have so far that are administrating the site. They're looking for ways to streamline content creation and publication workflow, and they just want to identify some tools and processes to help them be more effective. Sometimes they come to you with suspected issues, and they're absolutely bang on there, and we're just reinforcing the fact that they realize that there's an issue and they need to do something about it, but they're not sure what yet. And sometimes the issue is not the issue, and there's a whole bunch of underlying things that need to be sorted out. I think it's really important also to try to get some people that might not be the ones with the loudest voices involved, because there's a lot of people on the sidelines that are vital to the company or organization that have some really important things to say. Maybe they're not as confident in speaking and coming forward, but I do recommend trying your best to try to find everybody who might have something valuable to say, or that has a really pivotal task on the site, and try to talk to everybody, even if it means getting up early or scheduling something on the weekend, because it could be just the nugget of information that you're looking for. So the study checklist would be the updated content list, complete list of people who you're going to be interviewing, scheduling them. It's really nice if you have somebody that they know that's scheduling them, that you're not just calling them out of the blue, because that way it's if you don't know them personally, it's a little bit more difficult, I think, sometimes to create meetings with them. Sometimes you need some sort of consent form or non-disclosure agreement, and then a planning spreadsheet of either one that you make yourself or something that you download with all of your testing scenarios, survey questions, and etc. A lot of people have favorite tools for screen capturing, for surveys, and for having meetings. And then a document of some kind. This is probably something that needs to be created specifically for each study. You can use the heuristics, you can use the users or the different sections of the site as the container, as the different organizational pieces, but I think it's very helpful to have a summary at the very top, because some of the higher level stakeholders are just about reading a quick brief on it. And then sort of any analysis tools that you want to be using, checklists, guidelines, books that you've read, favorite authors and articles. And then for the report, you've got summary of goals, summary of issues, and a summary of recommendations. So you'll have them organized by the types of content, by tools, by process, by priority. And then any kind of annotated screenshots, video clips, and quotes. Quotes can be very, very helpful if you've had someone say something that's just, wow, that's fantastic, either attributed to them or with initials. And then recommendations, if you have some, organized again by type, by section. And then any next steps, because I think sometimes you've got stakeholders, they're fully bought in, all they want to do is, how do we get started? They just want to know what you do, very next thing once you hit the ground running. So any kind of additional tests or studies would be important to note at this date. So if you want to come back and test again in 6 months, or if you would like to group together another set of users to test, that's also something helpful to include. And then when it comes to development planning, you want to make sure that your issues are mapped to user stories, and that your user stories are kind of mapped to different sections and features of the site, grouped together and prioritized. And priorities, that can change depending on who you're talking to, of course. If somebody is an events coordinator, then the events section is going to be priority. So it's really important to have somebody who's some kind of product owner, somebody of some position, a vision, where they can make those kind of difficult decisions on an organizational level of what's the important thing for their website, how the website, what role that it plays in their organization. And now it's time for questions. I think there's a microphone in the middle of the room, and I've been encouraged to use that so that the questions can be recorded and heard by all. Oh, you're so exciting. I know it's at the end of the day, and it's the middle of a long week. So I wanted to also play you a fun video. And if you don't have any questions, I'm going to tell you that this is a video that I made with my friend Anne, and it's a video about working from home in the usability industry. So let me just get out of this.
Hey Vanessa, I just got off the phone with our client and we have a problem. They have a lot of click here's all over their homepage in bold, in red, and still users can't find out where to go. What are we going to do?
The site lacks visual focus. I think what we need is a great big call to action button.
Yes, that's exactly what we should do. Put a button on it. Vanessa, on this site, membership registration is down. I think it might be a usability issue.
Walk me through the registration process. Is there a sign up?
Well, there's this graphical element, but no, not really.
Okay, well that's the problem then. We need a button.
Yes, let's put a button on it. This is a social media integrated enabled site, but people are just not sharing, clicking, plussing, liking, tweeting. What are we going to do, Vanessa?
Well, there's the problem. The like button's tiny. What if every time you liked it, it would get bigger, like a cloud tag?
Yeah, put a button on it. We've got a situation. Our client called. They want a mega menu that is integrated search.
Okay, well, I think we can just make a big button in the shape of a magnifying glass on it.
Yes, let's put a button on it. So we have this situation. The support button's constantly being overlooked. People just keep calling.
The support button needs a help button. Decided.
Yeah, let's put a button on it. I got a call from Ray, the CEO. He's really quite concerned. You want to see more Web 2.0 elements on this flat design.
Sure, let's just put this great big glossy jiggly button that pops on it.
Yes, let's put a button on it. How are the users going to find the categories in a hierarchical structure in the search interface?
We could use buttons for the facets.
Yes, let's put a button on it. Audience segmentation. 15 users, each with 12 sub-users.
Okay. Dashboard with button, 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 button.
Yeah, let's put a button on it. Bounce rate reduction. What are we going to do to keep people on the site?
Maybe they're leaving by accident. What we should do is put up a modal window where they have to press a button to confirm that they want to leave, cancel for yes, and go for no.
Yes! Let's put a button on it. The client wants a single place to publish content to multiple sites. What do you think we should do?
Oh, they just need a syndication deploy button on the admin interface.
Yes! That's it! We just have to put a button on it. The marketing team is looking for ideas for subliminal persuasion for their call to action.
We could use a white button on white background with a white text.
What a great solution! Put a button on it! We just got in this RFP. They're asking for all kinds of things. Parallax, pop, digitize, monetize, tag cloud, entity reference, deployment pipeline, high performance. What are we going to put in our proposal?
Put a button on it, Anne. It's really that simple.
Of course. Put a button on it. Vanessa, we need to jump on a conference call right now. Can we use Skype?
Skype is down. Microsoft is down.
What about Google Hangouts?
They don't do the Google.
What about FaceTime?
I don't think they're Mac users.
WebEx?
That never works for me.
GoToMeeting?
That one either.
Download Join Me? Hello? 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 If only I had a button.
Thanks, everybody. Put a button on it. It's really that simple. Have a good evening. Do come up and talk to me.